Hello again, and welcome back to Simplify. I'm Ashley, and together we're working to unclutter our souls to focus more on our Christian walk. In the first session, we learned how our priorities and schedules impact the simple, spirit-filled life. In this session, Bill tells us that if you're working to unclutter your soul, then your finances and your career are two of the first things you have to simplify. How does the simplified life affect our attitudes toward God's financial provision? Which core values will make our careers both personally satisfying and pleasing to the Lord? Bill will provide some insight on both of these questions, but first, let's hear from Nancy, a woman who knows firsthand how much chaos out-of-control finances can cause, and how much peace stands to be gained from simplifying them.
I owned my own small business. It was an advertising agency. We did a lot of advertising for banks. Our largest client was Visa. We got big advertising space in a loft in the West Loop. We had 11 employees. We had creative people, art directors and copywriters. And I thought we had made it. I thought we were doing it really well. The only model I knew was a large agency. I didn't know how to run a small company, so we created this small business using a large agency model, which was clearly not the way to do it. Made some bad choices running the agency, and I didn't really spend time seeking God before I made these choices, because I thought, well, it's my business, it's my profession, I've done it for 20 years. And then the largest client, our name brand client, left. And that was 80% of my business. We lost a ton of income, but we still had all the expenses. I had employees to take care of, I had salaries to pay, I had leases to pay, I had health insurance to pay. I just panicked. I blew through all my capital money. I blew through the line of credit I had with my business. And next thing I knew, I started to eat up the equity in my house. I really didn't know what to do. I felt God was so disappointed in me. I didn't feel like there was a time where I could ever get back into his good graces. I never thought I would feel this kind of shame by being in that kind of debt. I never thought I'd feel the feeling of being a slave to money. And money was never important to me. I never valued it. But then when I incurred, over $300,000 of debt, I look back on it and I think, how did I ever let that happen? The first blessing came when I just surrendered and I had nothing. He brought a buyer for my company. And I did get out of a lot of debt. I had a plan that the equity in my house was gonna get me out of the rest of my debt, but when the bottom fell out of the economy, I lost all the equity in my house. So I sold my house, but for just what my mortgage was. And I sold about everything I possibly could. The rest I put in storage. And then the next thing God whispered to me was to call my folks. And I picked up the phone and I called my parents and I asked if I could move back home. And I haven't lived in my parents' home since I'm 18. It was really tough. I lived really small. But it was all one blessing after another. I spent time with my parents that I hadn't spent in years. I come from a Jewish family, and so they've never really seen my life as a Christian woman. And so they got to know me in a whole different way, which was a huge blessing. God taught me in a very disciplined way what it meant to be a good steward of his money. And I'm debt-free. I paid it all off. I could never have done it without God, and I thank him that I've gone through this, because I am changed, and it's so much for the better.
One of the ways we get financially reconciled to God is to believe that all we have comes from his hand. Really, if you think about it, it all comes from God. It all belongs to God. When we're born, he gives us life, he gives us talents and abilities. He gives us educational opportunities and later on vocation or employment opportunities. And then if we honor him and go his way, he blesses our life. And our earnings really are just a manifestation of the goodness and the providence of God. You would think the concept of living within your means is an easy one for people to grasp. I find that a lot of people get tripped up on this. And if people require a little extra tutoring, here's the way I try to help. I draw a line on a piece of paper and I say, if this is your current income, this is what I call God's provision for your life during this season. Think of it as God's provision level. Now, He's asking you to accept that and to live beneath that provision level so there's a little margin in your life. And when people understand this, they go, oh, but it's hard for me to live underneath the amount of God's provision. And I say, well, that's where contentment comes in. And contentment is a virtue that can be cultivated in your life. You can actually come to a point where, like the Apostle Paul came to the point in his life, he said, I've learned to be content when I have a lot of God's provision or when I have only a little of God's provision, and I live beneath that provision. Now, what some people do is they say, hey, God, I think you screwed up with my provision level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use debt to add to the provision level that you should have given to me, but again, you had your wires crossed. So I'm going to go into debt to increase my provision level. And then we all know where that leads. There comes that day when, you're a slave to that debt and you feel in bondage. And you look back at the time when you were content and lived within the means of God's provision, and you go, oh, I was smarter then. That was a better move. So if you can just keep in your mind, there is a current level of God's provision. And with contentment, you can live within that provision and live a joyful life and stay out of debt and bondage. Once a person is financially reconciled to God, they joyfully take the first tenth of their earnings and they return it to God. They give it for His purposes in this world. This is a bit of a priority test. It's a little test every 2 weeks or every month whenever your earnings come in. Then you say, I'm going to honor God. I'm reconciled with Him. I'm going to manage money His way. I'll take the first tenth of whatever He brings to me in earnings and I'll give it back to Him. Now, there's some faith involved in this. And I talk to a lot of people who get tripped up over this little step of faith. So someone says, hey, Bill, I'm a numbers guy. I know that it's going to take 100% of my income to get from A to B. I got to get to B. I got to help my kids through school. I got to save for retirement and all that. And I can't get it done. I can't get from A to B without 100% of my income. I go, wow, okay, there you are. Someone else will come and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to trust God's wisdom. I'm going to obey His word. And by faith, I'm going to believe that I can get from A to B on 90% of my income. And God will not only get me from A to B on 90%, He will take me to C. There will be an additional place of favor and blessing because I've honored Him with the first 10% of all that I earn. Now that little equation, A to B on 100% or A to B to C on 90% with the 10 given to God, this is the debate that has raged for a long time. Often these two kinds of individuals go to the same church. They've heard the same kind of teaching from God's Word about this. And I laugh about this because secretly each of these individuals thinks the other is an idiot. Really. The guy who needs 100% to get from his A to his B, he looks at the guy trying to do it on 90% and goes, you're an idiot. You really think that God's going to be, engaged in your life and He's going to honor you because of the tithe. You idiot. And then the other person who's the A to B to C on 90% looks at the other person and says, oh, I think you might be the idiot because you're never going to get to C. You're never going to have a story to tell of God's favor on your life. You're never going to lay your head on the pillow at night and know that you're doing your money management fully God's way. So when I make that little explanation to whoever will listen to me, the big question, of course, is what kind of idiot do you want to be? Because you're going to be one or the other of those idiots. And since I was about 18 years old, I decided, I'm going to be that second kind of idiot. I'm going to say, God, it all belongs to you. And I'm going to honor you with the first tenth of all my earnings and believe by faith that you're going to take me from A to B and even to this place called C. That doesn't necessarily mean money. It just means favor and blessing and protection. And for what it's worth, the story of my life has been about God being faithful, taking me from B to a place called C more times than I could count. Maybe 35 years ago, when I was the only one at my church who was helping people kind of budget and figure out how to do money management God's way, I remember one time saying, look, let me just simplify this. Let me make it just as simple as I possibly can. First 10% of all you earn goes to honor God with the tithe. Second, goes towards savings. Every pay period. You pay yourself. Instead of just blowing that second 10%, pay yourself and then live on the 80. So I just called it the 10-10-80 plan. Made it up. I'd never heard of it before. But that idea of savings goes all the way back in the book of Proverbs, where the writer one time says, hey, look at the ant. The ant is smarter than you think that the ant is. Might not have a big brain, but the brain works really well because the ant knows that it's got to set aside some savings, if you will, some stores during the summer because winter's coming. And I often ask my friends, do you have any awareness of the fact that winter is coming? There's going to be an unexpected expense. There's going to be an illness. Something is going to happen that's going to overturn your financial apple cart. When you have been diligent with saving over a long period of time, when those speed bumps come, you can live with a lot less anxiety because you've been saving diligently all throughout the course of your year. And if you've been doing this all throughout the course of your life, then when your earnings time comes to an end, well, you have those stores set aside for your later years. Finally, just overall, when you are fully reconciled to God financially, you're living within your means, you're giving Him the credit, you're saving and giving, and so there's a kind of financial peace that sweeps over your life, that sweeps over your soul. You sleep really well at night, and it's just a part of your life that can bring you joy instead of this low range kind of chronic anxiety. And God's rooting for you to live in peace.
I was born in Mexico City in 1979. Every job never really provided financially what the family needed. And eventually my father, he had some family that lived in the United States. And we were able to get the permits and everything to move to the United States. I didn't really have a good understanding of God and what His plan was for us. I graduated high school, and one of the first things that I had to do, because again, we were not financially stable, I had to go to work. And so my dad, was doing construction at the time. And so I had to jump into that and contribute to the home. I remember my dad came to me, he said, son, I know that there's a lot of things that you would like to do, but right now, we have to take care of the family, and financially, if we don't take care of this right now, we're going to be out on the street. That's how serious it was. Part of me was actually upset at God. I would pray, and I said, God, I don't get it. You gave me these passions, these things that I want to do, but I'm not doing anything with them. My other friends, they're out to college and they're doing all these things, and here I am, stuck. God still provided this. And I want to be faithful to what He gave me. I ended up losing my job. I was like, okay, God, I know that I wasn't quite happy with my job, but we needed a job. So I had no resume, but a friend of mine worked at an electronics store. And so I applied there and I got the job, And that was finally the time where I got a chance to break away from construction, But again, it was still not my passion, but I was there and God opened that door. So now being in the United States, one of the cool things that I discovered was art. First I got into pencil drawing, I eventually got into painting. Then I got into sculpting, and then from there I led into photography, and eventually that led into film. And at the church that I was volunteering at the time, the pastor came to me and said, "Hey Eddie, I have this idea for making a short film that will go with the message. Would you be interested in doing that?" I said, "Of course, that sounds like a great idea." And it did so well that later on he asked me, he said, "Hey, well, what do you think about the idea of maybe doing this every week?" I said that I wanted to serve God, and that this is obviously a way that we can serve. And it's, making movies. I mean, how much better can it get, So we started doing short films for Pastor Benito every week. He's the one that really started opening and enabling me to be able to use the medium of media, of filmmaking, of storytelling. And we didn't get paid, it was all volunteer work. And eventually it clicks. I said, wait a minute, we could be making money doing this. When Pablo and I made the company official, that's how You Film House came about. Through this process of being in a job that I didn't enjoy to where I am now, like all those things meant something. We have the opportunity to bless back, what God has done for me in a financial way. Changed everything. Brought freedom in that aspect. Without those things, there's no way that I would be successful in what I'm doing now.
God seems to instill a kind of passion in most of us, and often you can see that very early in someone's life. There's a friend of mine who's a pilot, and he's passionate about it. He's one of the best pilots I know. And I asked him one time, "How did you ever get into flying?" He said, I was standing in a field as a young kid, and I saw a plane fly overhead, and my heart started beating fast, and I said, "I'm going to learn how to fly." And he took flying lessons, and now all these years later, he has 20,000 hours and is still passionate about flying. Other people have this with words, and they wind up being writers or poets. Other people have passion around numbers. They wind up being stockbrokers or commodity traders or mathematicians or teachers or something like that. But I have an endless fascination with this kind of passion that most people have, that if it's followed, it often leads them down a vocational path that gives them a lot of joy in their working years. Now, let's be clear, it's up to us to discern what our basic passions really are. It's probably not fair to say to someone else, "You tell me what my passions are." You can get a cross-check if you want. But this is something we need to do, to search our hearts and say, what do I love doing? What do I love doing so much that I eagerly jump out of bed in the morning and say, I can't wait to do this all day long, and someone pays me for doing it. Feels illegal. But when you get that all lined up, it's a powerful motivator to have a great experience in the workplace. So you've identified your passion, and then you go into a workplace that wants to pay you for utilizing this passion. And in that workplace, you're going to find a culture. Every single workplace has a culture. And whether or not you're going to fit into that culture is a bigger deal than you probably think. Some cultures are laid back and easygoing and low intensity. Other cultures are very high intensity, high challenge, high change. And we fit better in one or the other kind of culture. When people are trying to figure out what company to work for, the first question I ask is, have you figured out what their culture is? Because you can have your passion right, and if you don't fit pretty well into the already established culture of that organization, you could have a rough go. Now, let's be clear about another thing. Once you're in a culture, you should try to improve that culture. Around Willow, we say that everyone on our staff is either a culture builder or a culture buster. Every conversation they have with one another in the hallways either kind of adds, lifts our culture, or it detracts and dings our culture. But finding an organization with the right culture and then adding to it and building on it is one of the great joys and contributors to happiness in the workplace. The third alignment, if you're trying to have a satisfying job, is what I call the challenge alignment. You're either going to be in a job where you're appropriately challenged, where you're under challenged, or maybe dangerously over challenged. Let me talk just a moment about those three ranges. If you're under challenged, for some people that sounds like that'd be a great job, because then you could play on the internet and call your friends. But actually, research shows someone who stays in an under-challenging position for too long, well, they're not going to be too happy, believe it or not. Their skills will atrophy and their motivation levels will go down. What about being appropriately challenged? Well, that's good. You get the work done and you can sleep well at night. I'll come back to that in a second. Then there's this other challenge level where you're dangerously over-challenged, where you work feverishly all day long, and then you get to the end of the day and your inbox is even fuller and your unfinished assignment stack is even higher. And then you go home and you toss and turn all night because you go, oh no, I can't get it all done tomorrow either. You can't stay dangerously over-challenged for a long period of time without paying the price. So here's some more interesting research. Where do you do your absolute best work? I know what you're all thinking, right in the center of that appropriately challenged range. And actually, that's not true. It's at the top part of the appropriately challenged range, even in the lower part of the dangerously over-challenged range. You need to be a little bit more than comfortably challenged at your job. You need to have a little stretch in your challenge level because you'll do your best work, you'll think your best thoughts. If you're a Christ follower, you'll say your best prayers, and your muscles will grow. It's like your muscles are being stretched at the gym a little bit. Same thing at work. If you're appropriately stretched, but not dangerously over-challenged, that's the sweet spot that will give you a lot of joy over a long period of time. I've had conversations with people who want to talk to me about their work conundrum. And I say, okay, tell me all about it. And they say, well, I have high passion. I'm right in the center of my passion excitement, and I love my job, but it doesn't pay me enough. High passion, low pay. I go, okay, well, let's think about that. And then maybe the next person walks in and they go, hey, I've got exactly the opposite problem. I have low passion, but I have high pay. And I go, oh, well, what do you want to do about that? And they go, I can't continue to live like this. Both of them kind of have a conundrum. And if it's that high passion, low compensation thing, well, you might need to get a second job to fix the compensation problem so that you can stay in your passion area. Or if you have low passion but high compensation, you might need to find some volunteer activity that you can do that will kind of up your passion, up your enthusiasm in life. But these four alignments don't lie. They're all pretty critical to a satisfying job. And if you need to play with them, if you need to experiment to get all four of them lined up, I would urge you to do so. I think it'll be worth your time and effort.
Jesus knew that finances would compete for our hearts when he said that we can't serve both God and money. If we want to unclutter our souls, we have to first loosen our grip on our possessions. There's no way around this truth. As Bill mentioned, it can be challenging to accept the current level of financial resources that God gives us. But when we do, when we say, God, I'm choosing to be content here, we find satisfaction that money can't buy. During this session, we also saw that while a fair salary does matter, real career alignment also includes our passion, our level of challenge, and the culture in which we serve. Now, as you and your group discuss these ideas, I encourage you to think through where you fall in terms of the health of your finances and the health of your working world.